Hello and welcome everyone to this important video. This Monday, we have looked into the Robotaxi scaling and what I observed last week because we saw some very weird things that Elon said. At the same time, when the stock was dropping, of course it's back up now, but when the stock was dropping right after earnings, people were wondering, ooh, the 7,000 mile thing, isn't that very concerning? When the CFO of Tesla said, you know what, we only drove 7,000 miles in 1 month with all the robotaxis in Austin. And it irritated me, it irritated many people. And on Monday, I talked about what I think I figured out what the true plan is of Elon and of the greater Robotaxi rollout. And since then, I took some time to model that plan out and give you a first insight into how this can actually look like. How does this new strategy, instead of going to Austin and just expanding Austin and scaling it to 2,000 robotaxis fast, how does a rollout actually look like where Tesla captures a far wider range of states far slower? So instead of going in hard in one city and scaling very rapidly to thousands and then doing the next city and then the next thing, it seems like Tesla is going broad and slow. And we want to check out today how this actually looks like in terms of numbers. So I want to present to you the latest Robotaxi simulator model. You can find that in Pioneerlands, by the way. If you're a citizen, we make it very affordable, only $9 a month, and you can actually download this model. We have something, by the way, if you're already a member, something very cool coming up, because we are bringing all these models into a digital SaaS system that we call the Pioneer operating system, Pioneer OS, that will be accessible to you guys for free. And a lot of these features, even for members who are free in Pioneerlands, so go to pioneerlands.net, we'll see all these things. And we hope to launch the Pioneer OS, where we can build our own civilization, seize control our own capital, and make better investment decisions, but also some other decisions beyond that as citizens of a new world we are building on the Pioneer OS. But for now, let's look at this model, what it all means. So what we discussed in the last video, before I jump into the details and show you how these numbers actually evolve and also what the actual charts look like when we look at the updated charts. I will get into this in a second. Let's start with the question, what we saw on Monday and what I explained. So what I was talking about is the old strategy that I believed was in place to go to Austin and just scale it to multiple thousands of robotaxis. With the numbers that we see now, that this scaling might be a little slower, right? That Tesla has to deploy the cars a little slower and more cautiously and drive much less than we thought initially per robotaxi in Austin, makes it unlikely that we are going to hit these numbers in Austin alone. Hey, creating these videos is a lot of work. Please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Now let's get back to the video. But at the same time, Elon said this other important thing. And the other important thing was that he believes or stated that end of this year, we will actually see Tesla Robotaxi reaching half of the US population. How does this make any sense? How can it be slower in Austin than expected? But at the same time, Elon believes end of the year, half of the US population is covered. And I came up with this explanation, which I think is the only explanation, that Tesla actually plans to unlock way more states and cities by end of the year than expected, but go into each city only with a very small number of cars and slowly, like in Austin, establish, the basic mapping and all these things. So what I did in the last video is just listed all the states where you can start autonomous driving without any approvals, no real approvals at least, where you can self-certify, just have to go through a basic application process and not prove anything. You just self-certify and you're off to the races, more or less. And there's a large number of states where this is possible. Of course, California and New York are not part of this set of states. Texas is also actually higher regulations now, but they are on track. But it's Nevada, it's Georgia, it's North Carolina, North Dakota, Utah, West Virginia, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and surprisingly, Illinois and Ohio, where you have self-certification. You could use the Austin data and you could easily start commercial robotaxi operations this year. So this is what a lot of people are not fully aware of. California has a very cumbersome process. You will take probably at least a year before Tesla can start real commercial paid operations in San Francisco and Los Angeles. If they're very fast and very efficient, they can get it done in a year. But in these states, nothing really holds you back. And when we sum it all up, I explained this in the last video, I arrive at that number here, 141 million Americans in these states combined. So it is indeed very possible with no technical hurdles that Tesla hasn't already proven to be able to take. With no hurdles in place other than operational execution in terms of getting all these applications through, with no real hurdles, Tesla could, if they wanted to, be in as many states as capture 141 million people, which is roughly 50% of the US population. So I didn't say they would do that, but after Elon made this comment, that is the only explanation what Elon could have meant. And so for us as shareholders and people who want to understand the future and predict it short-term and mid-term, I think that's a very good hint. So the theory is Tesla goes broad and not deep. Going deep, meaning a lot of robotaxis for one singular city like Austin, will take more time than we thought, but going broad could take much less time than we thought. Why does it make sense? Because it allows you to have a low risk approach, slower scaling, 20 robotaxis on the ground, scaling to 40, scaling to 80 over 3, 4, 6 months, but in a lot of cities in parallel. So each city cautiously gets unlocked, but we are unlocking basically a very large number of cities in parallel to get to scale without compromising safety. And so that's actually a pretty smart plan. You need a lot of these operational teams on the ground. I don't think that's any problem for Tesla. You need, 5 people or something per city who are really good managers overseeing this, and you're done. So how does it look like in terms of the actual model? I created a model to actually determine one very important question. What does it mean in terms of absolute number of robotaxis deployed by month, by year, next year? How does it change our model? And how does it change the free cash flow generated and added to Tesla? And what about the all-decisive forcing function? I invented this word a little bit that's now getting out there. Everyone is using forcing function now for Tesla, the analysts, which is great. So I came up with this concept that the stock can do all kinds of things in between, but there is a point, there is a wall, there is a forcing function that once this forcing function is hit, it forces the stock up, and it has no choice but to go up because everyone who knows anything has to buy the stock at that point. And that forcing function is free cash flow, and the percentage of free cash flow generated by the Robotaxi division as a percentage of 2024 total full free cash flow of Tesla. In other words, once Robotaxi with fast monthly growth hits that critical mass that I defined as 5%, 5% of free cash flow of all of Tesla in 2024, you can't sit there anymore and not understand that the wall is coming, that the forcing function is here. So that is my forcing function. And of course, my interest is now with this new theory that I think is very evidenced by what we have heard from Tesla, from Elon. With this new theory, when do we hit that forcing function? Because that is what we want to know, because that's the latest point where the stock has to be driven towards 600 plus. So in my opinion, of course, you never know. But I mean, cash is cash. What are you going to do? So let's take a look what the logic actually tells me. So as you can see here, look at this. Texas, I can zoom in a little bit so you see more, 150. Here you have Austin. You have 30 robotaxis. I scaled down the rollout speed dramatically because facts on the ground, right? So I said 30 robotaxis on the ground, probably around now to end of the week, end of July. Let's say it's 30. I think that's conservative, but let's say it's 30. And let's say they're scaling very slow because I want to be very conservative after what we have heard. To 40, 50, 60, 70, right, by November. Now, when you look at the regulation, there is reason to believe that by November, Tesla can probably remove the safety drivers. By November, they will have accumulated enough miles to make their case with the DMV, Texas regulators, and say, you know what, get rid of the safety drivers, and then scaling becomes much, much easier. So there's a leap to 100, right, from November to December, and then we go up in increments of 100 robotaxis per month. So then it gets more aggressive by March to 500. So there's a 200 robotaxi leap, and then in 200 increments up, then in 300 increments up, all the way to end of next year, where we hit saturation point that I think is around 3,000 to 4,000 robotaxis in Austin, greater Austin metro area, of course. Then you have the whole city under control. I think at that point, everyone else is dead and Robotaxi dominates Austin. Now, I think that's actually realistic because you will see this inflection point. Here, you get rid of the safety drivers in November, December. Then you go into a more aggressive rollout where you add 100 in 1 month, right? After doing all this testing here without drivers and see how this goes. You try to keep up the pace with 100. Once you have done that, it gets more seamless and okay, now everything runs, deploy more cars. That's the theory. Now, that is much fewer cars than I originally modeled because I thought they're going vertical into Austin and capture that one city and show everything. But after Elon's comment, I changed my theory because you want to be more cautious. You want to be very, very hands-on in the beginning. But at the same time, why wait for the rest? So we know all these other areas here that I listed. Here you see the states further to the left, Texas. And here I assumed only Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Florida, Illinois, Ohio, California. So I left out some of the others here, Mississippi and West Virginia and stuff like that, North Dakota. I clustered them here. I added California, even though that cannot be scaled very easily. Go into the theory in a second. But I also added a row called all other because we don't know what else is coming. So in all other, I basically made the assumption up here that you have 10 additional cities like these, either in the same states or maybe in new states, that we just cram in there and say there's just an all other, like 10 additional cities of this sort that are coming and are being added in, in November this year. Why? Because Elon said half of the population, that would get us there. And it's reasonable because that's not hard to do because of lack of regulations. So if you do that, how does Austin look like? I explained that. What did I do then? I took San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston, the big cities in Texas, because that point here, where you are allowed and get this approval in Texas, it applies to everywhere in Texas, but it's very likely that the municipalities, the cities like San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston require you to show some additional data for their specific city and have some negotiations with the regulators in the city. But that's a minor thing if you have Texas-wide green light that I think Tesla will get in December for, driverless cars, like no safety driver. So it would be smart in September to start these additional cities, add them in Texas, and start doing your mini testing. 15 cars on the road, 20, 30, so very slow. Going to 50, and then you're off to the races, lagging Austin by only a month for the big, scaling by the hundreds. So that's my theory here. And that then continues here in this direction, by the way. So you're ending up lagging by 1 month, right? In 2026. The other big Texas metropolitan areas trail Austin by a month. And then the rest, I'm not going to go into all the details, but I'm basically assuming in October, so beginning of Q4 this year, they will probably do it earlier, to be honest, but I think in October, November, Tesla, under this theory that Elon, hinted at, will start announcing, okay, now Phoenix is getting unlocked, Las Vegas is going to get unlocked, Atlanta, Miami, and then in December, January, maybe also Chicago, Cleveland, or whatever, like some Ohio one, I don't know which one in Ohio, but maybe Cleveland. And then a bunch of others, 10 additional cities, right? So if that is true, I think that will have an impact on the stock, by the way, because this would be crazy. That would be basically a surprise act where we see after the disappointment that we only have 7,000 miles in Austin, there will be the reverse, the opposite of a disappointment, excitement, that Tesla actually goes broad. And we will see this trickling in starting in September, would be the theory that we have now some evidence for. So if you start seeing that and it starts accelerating and Tesla suddenly says, you know what, deploying in San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston, you know what, aiming at Las Vegas, and people are like, oh my God, what's going on? And then suddenly, oh, guess what, also Atlanta, Miami, Chicago, Cleveland coming. Then you know that this theory here is probably right. Decelerate per city, accelerate the total number of cities. Actually makes a lot of sense. It makes it safer without losing speed. Now, as you can see, my scaling per city is incredibly conservative. 15 cars in a city like Cleveland, 20 at 5, 30 at 10 more, right? And you see Austin's actually faster than that, but very conservative, and it keeps being conservative. 30 goes to 50, goes to 60, goes to 70, right? So pretty conservative, but once in each one you have the critical number of data, points and you have that unlock, suddenly you can go into the scaling by 100 Robotaxi per month and then 200 per month cadence that I would predict for Austin once they take more time and actually do this. Now, let's get to the meat. We are interested in total numbers and what that all means. Before I go into the total numbers, I will also add I calculated the total miles, right? And miles, the assumption here is how many miles per car do we generate? That number is going up. Let me explain why. That is the average number across all robotaxis to make this calculable. I'm assuming 400 in July, which is very low, but that is roughly the 7,000 divided by whatever cars, by the 20, 30 cars, and or 20 cars. And it goes slowly up because the more Austin gets evolved, the more miles you drive per robotaxi, and it actually goes up all the way here to the endpoint of 4,000 miles per robotaxi per month, right? Which sounds maybe a lot, but when you do the math, it's not that much for a robotaxi that has nothing else to do than driving around all day long. So it goes up to 4,000, so 10x the number per miles per robotaxi as a function of how commercially sound these things are. So, and that's like roughly 150 miles or something per day, depending how many days. So what does it all mean? It means here you see the accumulated total miles, which is important because that's for regulators, very important. So I assume in July we will, hit roughly 12,000 miles. They reported 7,000 last week, so 12,000 I think is realistic given the exponential expansion. Then we hit 32,000, 100,000 miles. These are regulator miles, right? You can report all this stuff. And then it goes up very dramatically, very quickly. It hits 1 million miles already this year. 1 million miles full robotaxi FSD for regulators. Then 2.5 million, and then it goes up very dramatically and hits basically 600 million miles for regulators. 600 million miles, that's a lot of miles, by end of next year. So let's get to the most important number here for now. And that important number is the total number of robotaxis. So by December, how many do we have? Look at this, 690 robotaxis. Let me actually jump to let's stay here. 690, or let's jump to the summary here. So I changed the expected case, changes actually pretty dramatically down in this new scenario. So I'm becoming more conservative. Roughly 700 robotaxis deployed by December this year. I think before I had like 1,000 or something, 1,200. I would say no, let's be a little conservative here. I think we will have under 700 robotaxis live end of 2025. Now comes the interesting number. My prediction now would be that we only have 40,000 robotaxis by end of next year. So not 100,000 as I said before, but 38,000. And then I became also more conservative for 2027, saying it's 100,000. As we will see in a second, that should not concern us a bit in terms of shareholders because there are, pretty good numbers here on cash. So let's go to the only thing that is truly interesting for us as shareholders and forcing function investigators. So this chart cuts through all the noise and tells you what my latest analysis shows in terms of forcing function. Look at that. This is the expected case that is based on this high resolution scaling timeline that I outlined here, right? You have the months here. So this is end of 2025 and then goes on. Here you see the 690 robotaxis. And what is this? Here you see the percentage of free cash flow generated as a percentage on an annualized basis. So I'm looking at monthly free cash flows coming in from the Robotaxi division and express it as a percentage of this 3.58 billion free cash flow of Tesla in 2024, right? So here we would bring in already 179, which is kind of a lot, but that is 0.72% of that big number we see on top. Here, this number is the irrelevant one. This is basically the annualized free cash flow, right? And what you see is that in May next year, which is surprisingly close to my original prediction where I said April for the expected case, that is when we cross that threshold of that 5%. So here is your forcing function. If this model is correct, Who knows if it's correct? And here you see it in a chart. The red line is free cash flow, $3.58 billion in free cash flow, which represents all of Tesla's free cash flow of 2024. The blue line represents the annualized run rate of free cash flow per month. So we, for example, in April 2026, we take the free cash flow generated for April based on this model from the Robotaxi division, multiply times 12, that's annualized, and say where are we at. And the yellow line is the forcing function threshold, which is 5% of that line. So it's not complicated math, but the yellow line is 5% of the red line. My theory is that the market, once you cross the 5%, latest around this area, 3 to 10%. I think once you cross the yellow line, you would need to be very stupid to not understand that you will hit the red line in a very short period of time, because to 20x is very easy at that growth rate that we see. So what you also see is that end of next year. What does that mean? What does that mean here? What does that mean? It means that in that new model that reflects what Elon hinted at, and it reflects a much slower scaling rate per city than I initially modeled. Wider scaling into way more cities in parallel, while we decrease the speed of scaling significantly per city. It means that under this new model, we will basically double Tesla's free cash flow of 2024 just through robotaxis. So robotaxis alone will add all of Tesla's 2024 free cash flow from the entire company already next year, at least in December, on an annualized level, which is all that counts, right? And not just that, you see the growth rate, and you know what that means, right? It means this thing goes through the roof. And you see it here. Here, red is actually the expected case. Here's 2026. You see here the green line is not the threshold. This time the green line is actually the free cash flow in total of 2024. And you see how the red line basically crosses it here. So basically bringing in as much free cash flow as Tesla generated in all of 2024 just through Robotaxi. But then look what happens in 2027. This thing more than doubles. So now you're in a situation, and that is why this is such a powerful forcing function for the stock. Now you're in a situation that you not just double on an annualized level of December 26 free cash flows. You're not just doubling the free cash flow of Tesla, but you're on track of tripling it, and so on and so forth. That is why this is a forcing function, and that is why this new model reveals it's possible to stay exactly where I predicted it to be next April,